Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Intergen on the topic protecting the custodians of our biodiversity. Today, we have the honor, the pleasure that this Intergen session will be chaired by Christopher Mbanefo. Christopher is a full member of the Club of Rome and describes himself as a humble seeker of wisdom and peace, while embarking on an intergalactic space trip as a resident of a beautiful planet in orbit around a star we fondly know as our sun. He's an innovator and entrepreneur and combines more than 30 years in multidisciplinary activities. A highly qualified aerospace engineer and professional pilot, and is currently the CEO of OXapplus Solutions. Christopher, thank you for being here with us today, and the floor is yours to begin.
Okay, thank you so much, Matthias. I appreciate that. Greetings to everybody. I'm very honored to share some time with you, and I don't want to make it like a presentation, an academic affair. I would much rather have a conversation so that we can all interact with each other and get to know ourselves effectively, better. So I'll just kind of set the tone, and then we can take it up from there. So based on the introduction from Matthias, he said I'm an aerospace engineer, which I am. So let me start with that, and then kind of link it to the custodians of our biodiversity, i.e., our indigenous brothers and sisters. So that's kind of an interesting line to draw. So let's see if you can follow me. All right. So what is a spaceship? A spaceship is a vessel that we are involved in designing as engineers. So let's look at the International Space Station and let's think about what the challenges are. First of all, we have to create a space, a volume that is suitable for human life, for life. We protect it with an aluminum shell, we pressurize it, and we have to have life support systems within that unit. The life support systems have to support the requirements that we have. We need oxygen, we inhale, we exhale CO2. We have to limit the concentration of CO2 within the cabin. So we need to have ways of removing the C from the O2. And that is a process. What do we do with the excess C? These are questions that then come up. And the more circular we can make the design, the more sustainable we can make the design, the longer we can stay in space. And so when we look at the ultimate spaceship, the ultimate space vehicle, it's actually our planet. Our planet is the most amazing space vehicle, spaceship that I personally know of. It supports the life systems in such an amazing way. And one of the things that is so amazing is that it does it without any effort from our side. So when people open the first book of Genesis and you look at, and there's somewhere it says that the Garden of Eden, I call it differently. It's the planet of Eden. That's the beautiful earth that we have. So that is effectively what it is. Now, within the spaceship, we have what we call life support systems. And likewise, on the planet, we also have life support systems. And one of these life support systems plays a vital role in maintaining what let's call it the carbon balance, the planetary carbon balance. So one of the things we need to understand is that carbon, like water, let me start with water. What is water? If we drink a glass of water, how old is that water? That water that we drink that we think is fresh water is actually millions of years old. Because when we drink water, it passes through our system, it comes out, and like all water, eventually it finds its way through streams, lakes, rivers, into the ocean. The water molecule evaporates, becomes a cloud, solidifies by the force of gravity. It falls down in the form of rain, snow. If it's snow up in the mountains, it can be retained as ice. Those are the glaciers. It's a reservoir of fresh water. It's like an ice cube in the fridge. We keep it there until we need it. When we need it, we take the ice cube out of the deep freezer. What do? We use it to cool. It turns into water. That's the role of a glacier. And so water is in a perpetual cycle, And the same is with carbon. Carbon is in a perpetual cycle. When we inhale air, we use the oxygen, we exhale CO2. CO2 is absorbed by the plants. Through photosynthesis, it splits the C from the O2. The plants release the O2. They capture the C, and that becomes the biomass of the plants, of the fruits, of the vegetables that we consume again. The excess carbon that all plants receive is passed through the roots into the ground. Once the carbon arrives in the ground, there's an ecosystem in the ground. There's an exchange of carbon between multiple organisms, mycelium, bacteria, fungi, etc. And so that carbon germinates eventually into another plant. And we eat the fruit of the vegetable, we absorb that carbon. That carbon translates into our bodies. And what we don't need goes out back into the ground to form another cycle. So carbon is in constant flux. This is one of the things we need to understand. And the whole thing is in beautiful balance until we came and we have now, unbalanced the planet. What have we done? Over the years, forests have decayed. Those old forests were fossilized. They became coal. So the coal is in the ground. Those are the old ancient forests that are now fossilized. It's carbon. Coal that is exposed to geological pressure liquefies, becomes liquid. That becomes petroleum. Now, all of us have experienced a situation where you take a bottle of Coke or Prosecco or any type of bubbly, and you look at it. Do you see any bubbles? No, you don't. It's pressurized. But as soon as you open that bottle, the bubbles appear. So when you drill a hole into the ground, you hit oil, which is what? Pressurized coal that has become liquid. Once you hit oil, it pops out like champagne. The gas that comes out is natural gas. Okay? So what we're doing is, the carbon that has been captured over the years, thousands and thousands of years on the life of the planet, as part of the life system, the design, we have gone and disturbed that equilibrium by bringing that carbon out. And when we burn it, burning or a fire is a rapid form of oxidization. When something oxidizes quickly, it's a fire. You take the carbon and you're adding oxygen, it releases energy, and it comes out as CO2. Okay? And so we quickly see how we have unbalanced by drilling and releasing amounts of carbon back into the atmosphere. But at the same time, we've been doing what? Removing the mechanism that's part of the life support system of the planet, which are the forests, the terrestrial carbon sinks. Once you disturb an equilibrium, all sorts of things happen. Now, literally, we have a planetary carbon imbalance. Some of you may know that it's not just the terrestrial carbon sinks that absorb carbon. Actually, the majority of the carbon, CO2, is actually absorbed by the oceans. They make up 70% of the surface of the Earth. So it makes sense. One can recognize that. Now, the question is, well, if the oceans are absorbing all that carbon, what's the point? Why are we still in a carbon imbalance? Because the oceans were not designed to absorb that amount of carbon. And so what we are measuring today is a drop in the pH factor because of the absorption of carbon. A drop of the pH factor is also known as acidification. The oceans are becoming acidic. So what has that got to do? What does that mean? Well, let's take one step back. If we take the oceans and we imagine removing all the water, what do we see? Or what would we see? What we would see is the equivalent of a desert. And like a desert, like in a desert, you have oasis. The oasis in a desert is the origin of life. That's where the cycle of life starts, in a desert. Remove the oasis, there's no more life in the desert. The desert becomes dead. That's why the oasis obviously play a vital role in the life cycle of a desert. The equivalent of the oasis in the ocean are the coral reefs. So what we're noticing now is that with the increased acidification of the oceans, it's affecting the oasis of the oceans. It's affecting the coral reefs. The coral reefs are now bleaching. And with the bleaching of the coral reefs, we are literally affecting the first building block of life in the ocean. Now, I'm going to draw a link from the smallest life form to the largest life form in the ocean. So let me say small to the largest life form in the ocean. The smallest life form, or rather, between the largest and the smallest life form, we have an interesting life form called the crustaceans. What are they? Shrimps, lobsters, shellfish. Those are the crustaceans. The interesting thing about that life form is that it scales down literally 1-to-1 all the way down from what we can see from our dimension all the way down to the microscopic scale. So when you take a drop of ocean water and you look at it through a microscope, you will see two things. You will see plankton and you will see small crustaceans, little shrimps. All right. Now, what we are noticing at that level, at that scale, on the microscopic scale, we are seeing or observing that the crustaceans are losing more shell material than they are able to produce due to the increased acidity. So in other words, they're literally dissolving in front of our eyes. Now, what does that mean? Now I'm going to make that connection from the smallest to the largest. The largest life form on the planet are whales. The largest of the whales is the blue whale. Every time that blue whale opens its mouth, we say, or we were told when we were in school, they eat plankton. But that's only half of the many. The other half of the many of the whale is the fact that they're also taking in a whole lot of crustaceans. And that's where they get their bioprotein. So we are predicting, unfortunately, and I pray we're wrong, in the next couple of years, 5 to 10 years, we will start to observe whales starving in the ocean. That's the connection. And a lot of people will be wondering, oh my God, what's happening? Why are the whales starving? There's so much plankton in the ocean. Yeah, but there's something else missing. And so what I'm trying to say here is that we need to understand that we need to keep things in balance. In balance. One of the things that I talk about is the art of balancing in life. The Chinese call it achieving the equilibrium of Tao by balancing the yin and the yang. And you've seen that symbol of the two water drops, black and white water drops, to form a perfect circle. And that's really what the planet was. It was a balancing of yin and yang to form a beautiful wholeness. So now that we understand that the planet is a mini or a huge spaceship upon we are all the astronauts within. So if somebody says, hey, I want to be an astronaut, hey, dude, we are all already astronauts. I don't have to go to join NASA. We're all astronauts on the same spaceship, depending on the same life support systems. Now, we are a crew. We are a crew. Some of us are busy with navigation. Some of us are busy with research. And some of us are busy maintaining the life support system on the spaceship. We have a problem with the life support system on the spaceship. We just sent a radio call to Houston and we said, Houston, we have a problem. Everything is going haywire. Temperature is increasing. CO2 levels are increasing. The water is becoming acidic. And we have a fire on board. As a matter of fact, we have multiple fires on board. But nobody is listening to the guys who are maintaining the life support system. As a matter of fact, we are ignoring them. We're not giving them food. We're disconnecting them from everything that we do. They're also astronauts. They're part of the crew. Those are the people who are currently the custodians of our remaining biodiversity. And the remaining 80% of the remaining biodiversity on the planet happens to be in the remaining terrestrial carbon sinks, the remaining forests. natural habitats. Who are our crew members that are maintaining the life support systems? Indigenous peoples. They are the experts. They've been doing that since the spaceship was launched. And they've been doing a pretty damn good job at it. Now you have astronauts that have no clue about maintaining life support systems, who are supposed to be either in the kitchen preparing food, or they're supposed to be cleaners, or they're supposed to be in charge of navigation, whatever. Everybody on the spaceship has a job. Now you have a whole bunch of people that are trying to tell the crew that has been looking after the life support system what to do, that they know it better. And of course, the guys who have been looking after the life support system look at these guys and say, you guys are probably totally nuts. You don't know what you're doing. As a matter of fact, it's because of your activity that the life support system is shutting down, endangering the life of everyone on the spaceship. Those are our brothers and sisters, the indigenous peoples. They are the ones that have been maintaining and looking after the life support system. And without them, spaceship is doomed. So this is a wake-up call. It's a huge wake-up call. So we need to, first of all, recognize that we're all in it together. We're all astronauts on the same spaceship. And this spaceship is traveling through intergalactic space. And we have to hand over, just like on the ISS, International Space Station, if we are a crew and there's another crew coming on board, the last days that we are on the spaceship, what do? We clean up. We clean up, we prepare the handover notes to the next crew that is coming up. We make sure that before we leave, we have briefed them on how to run the spaceship. The analogy to the world, those are our parents. Before they leave the spaceship, they hand over to us. They teach us what we need to know so that we can run this spaceship until such a time that we hand over to our children. Okay? Now, how can we have a situation where a current crew doesn't give a damn about how to hand over the spaceship to the next generation of crew? They're using up all the supplies that we have on the spaceship, greedily consuming all the supplies that we have on the spaceship, leaving a mess behind, and then they exit and hand over a chaotic spaceship to the next crew. That's the situation. That's the equivalent of what is happening today. And we have some of these astronauts that are saying, you know, we don't give a damn. It's good for business. It's good for money, whatever. Dude, woman, sister, brother, what are you saying? It's not your spaceship. You inherited it to pass it on. It's not yours. It's not yours. You're here in this spaceship for what? 70, 80, 90 years? And then you have an individual that is supposed to be intelligent, that is supposed to have a life consciousness, that picks up a stone, a pebble, and says, I am the owner of this stone. and is willing to kill somebody, a fellow astronaut, by claiming ownership of a stone, a pebble. Now, the question I want to ask is, how old is that stone? The planet is, what, the universe is supposed to be, what, 13, 14 billion years old since the Big Bang? So we can safely assume that that stone came to be somehow shortly thereafter, floating around in space, was attracted, whatever, by gravitational force, ended up on the planet. And then this astronaut that just showed up yesterday picks up this stone and claims that I am the owner of something that has been there before he was even conceived and will be there millennia thereafter. And you are rationally, arguing that this is your stone. If you look at it from that point of view, you come to the conclusion that he's an idiot. He's delusional. It's the equivalent of saying, I own this rainbow. I'm going to sell this rainbow to you. Really? At that point, I will tell him, I will sell you a shovel. So that instead of selling me the rainbow, I'll sell you this shovel. Go and dig at the end of the rainbow and collect your treasure. I'll give you a discount on the shovel. That's the madness. That's the delusional forces we're dealing with. So, our brothers and sisters who are the custodians of the remaining biodiversity, the life support systems of our spaceship, they understand certain things that those on the other crew members do not understand. They understand that you cannot own a stone. They understand the cycle of carbon, the carbon cycle. If I, as a human being, are no longer in this dimension, I am buried. My body decomposes. The carbon that makes up my body starts to move. It decomposes. It is absorbed by the soil. Each carbon atom of my body becomes part of the soil, out of which the carbon re-emerges in the form of a plant and becomes a tree. So what does that mean? It means that part of my material existence has been transformed into a tree. This is where indigenous people, recognizing the perpetual carbon cycle, will look at the tree as a part representation of our ancestors. And they are physically and scientifically correct. They are not wrong, because it's part of the cycle. And once you see yourself as part of the cycle, your own individual uniqueness is as unique as a snowflake. Every snowflake we know is unique. And yet, it is part and parcel of a whole. Each one of us is a snowflake. We will melt one day, become liquid water, and join the cycle. That's the cycle of life. Now, the indigenous people worldwide, whether you are in Africa, South America, North America, Asia, the island nations, Europe, Australia. When you get down and you speak and interact with indigenous people, that is when you begin to realize that they are all, at the end of the day, saying the same thing. And one of the most amazing things that you find out is that all of them refer to the earth as Mother Earth. Isn't that amazing? In every culture, in every human community, they all have the same fundamental term for Earth. One, it's a mother, i.e., female. So is there something they know that we supposedly Western civilized people do not know? Well, the answer is yes. There's a hell of a lot that they know that we don't know. Because we're still running around and people are still selling pieces of stone that they call them, that they claim that they are the owners. And to show how absurd a world we're living in, I'll give a basic analogy. Some of you, I think, have heard me say this, so I will excuse myself for those who have heard it before. But you have a bunch of monkeys in a cage. A very small percent of the monkeys, very small percent of these monkeys are accumulating and commandeering and stealing, and you name it, what, all the bananas in the cage. As a matter of fact, they have now more bananas than they can ever eat in their life. And they keep accumulating more bananas, preventing other monkeys from eating the bananas. Now, if we were to observe a cage of monkeys, and one subset of monkeys is experiencing that behavior, it would make a very interesting research project, which would be you wait for the monkey to die, you take an autopsy, take that brain, freeze it, and then you slice it into wafers, and you check it under the microscope to figure out where in this brain did something go wrong. That is what we as human beings would probably do. And during their lifetime, probably do an MRI and do that slicing in an electronic format. And then come up with some great theory and write books and publish it in Nature magazine. But the funny thing is, if that monkey happens to be a Homo sapiens, we don't do that. We put them on the cover of Forbes magazine and hail them as heroes, which basically makes me conclude maybe the problem is not them, the problem is those who are reading the Forbes magazine. So let's move on. The other thing that indigenous people recognize through indigenous wisdom is something that we in Africa call Ubuntu. What is Ubuntu? How do we explain what Ubuntu is? Ubuntu effectively can be transformed or translated into Western English language as my experience of myself as a human depends on you. Depends on another human. My humanity is defined by how you treat me. So I use this kind of funny story because I've seen it in so many ways. You have somebody, a family, they have a little dog. They got this little dog as a puppy. Now you ask yourself, how does that dog perceive itself. And if you ask that dog, the dog will probably think of himself and say, I'm human, except I have a handicap. And sometimes they don't treat me well. Because what I want to do, I want to sit with them at the table. I want to eat their food. I want to sleep with them in their bed. I want to hang out with them. Wherever they go, I want to go. Whatever they do, I want to do. That's how these little dogs behave, right? And so in the dog's experience, he thinks he's a mini human being with a bit of kind of handicapped. He can't kind of hold a fork and knife. So he says, you know what, to hell with a fork and knife. I stick my head into the bowl. Easier. Makes sense. Until the day of reckoning, the day of revelation is when that dog meets another dog. It is then the dog realizes, oh my God, I'm a dog. Are you with me? We've had stories of children lost, brought up by a pack of wolves. And they have said themselves, it was only when they met a fellow human being did they realize that they were not wolves. Before then, they thought they were part of the wolf pack. Okay? So this is the issue of Ubuntu. So we all have to be aware of that. And now I'm going to explain that through an indigenous definition of love. When we look at Western languages of European origin, we have an expression that says, you know, I love you, je t'aime, ich liebe dich. Okay? That is a verb. It's action, right? It's an action. And when you think about it, it raises certain questions. If I walk up to a woman and I say, I love you, she may feel defensive. She may say, whoa, 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 please. So the expression of I love you, if it is not responded to in a reciprocal way, can be defined as emotional rape. Let me say that again. The act of saying I love you to somebody, if it is not reciprocal, the other person, yeah, I love you too. Oh, thank God for that. Okay, that's cool, right? But if one person says, whoa, 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 I don't feel the same way you do. So, you know, you're now entering my space here. It's the same thing as sex. Is it consensual? Yes, no. If it is, good. If it's not, it's considered rape. So it's kind of interesting. Now, in my language, my indigenous language, Igbo, of Eastern Nigeria, when we express love, we say, Afulum Ginania. Afulum. I see me. I see myself. Ginania, in your eye. I see myself in your eye is the expression of love that we, my people, my indigenous people, use. What does that mean? It can mean two things. One is that physically I'm so close to somebody else that I see my reflection in the other person's pupil, in the other person's eye, but that's not what it means. You see, when we look at somebody, you only look at somebody if you have eye contact, if you look at somebody's eyes. Otherwise, I'm looking at the forehead, the ears, the nose, the mouth. I'm looking at your face. I'm looking at your whatever. But once you have eye-to-eye contact, it's like I'm now looking at your soul, right? I'm looking into your existence, into you as an entity. I'm penetrating the physical. And if I look into your eye, and the more I look, the deeper I get into you. And right at the end of that vision, I see myself. I see myself. I recognize that we are actually one. You are me in reverse. That is the expression of love. It's not a verb. It's not a one-way action. You get my point? This is deep. This is very deep. And you know who else understood that? There was a man, there was an African-looking man who, after his birth, he was a refugee. As an infant, his parents took him, and they took him to Africa. And he lived there for the first 7 years of his life. They took him there because they were persecuted. The government at the time had decreed that they're going to kill all the young male children up to the age of 2. So they had to flee that land and go to a place where they could blend, where the child would be safe, where he wouldn't show up in some, like a rotating beacon, where the camouflage worked. So they took him to Africa, Egypt, to be precise. And after 7 years, his parents took him back to the homeland. And when he grew up, he became a man. At the age of 30, he had some amazing revelations. And he started talking about indigenous wisdom and was laughed at and was literally chased out of his own hometown, which happened to be Nazareth. He was a carpenter. Probably not a very good carpenter, because we don't have any relics that he made. There's no table that was made. So I presume he wasn't a very good carpenter, you know. But anyway, and so he came up with this amazing theory or story where he was asked, of all the laws of Moses, which one is the most important? And he was a sharp guy. So he confused them by doubling the response and said, of all the laws of Moses, these 2 are the most important, 2. So that confused those who set the question. And he said, first and foremost, honor and love thy God with all your heart and all your might. Now, if in the book where it is written, and you all know that book, go check it out. He said, honor and love thy God, your God, whatever you understand as God, love it. Second, love thy neighbor as yourself. Which means what? You have to love yourself before you can love your neighbor. You must love yourself. If you have no self-love, you have no love to give. And so in so many ways, he was saying what? Afulum ginania, which can be summarized as the consciousness of Ubuntu. That is indigenous wisdom. And the man who said those words, guy from Nazareth, there was a reason why his parents took him to Africa, to Egypt, so where he could blend. He was an indigenous person. Okay? And let's talk of empowerment. How do we now arrive at empowering? How do we empower our brothers and sisters who are the custodians of the remaining 80% of our biodiversity? This is a question I'm asking all of us, because they are the astronauts looking after the life support system. They're vital. We cannot forget them. We cannot abandon them as crew members. So that is effectively the work that I'm trying to do now. Looking for means and ways to empower those crew members to make sure that they can not only continue doing the work, but to help them fix the life support system that we vitally need for the spaceship to continue on its mission. We need the life support systems to work so that we can, when we hand over the spaceship to the next crew, they have a life support system that is working. So what I am doing, to make it very concrete, is we're looking at ways, or we have identified ways, and we're executing that, of measuring what the carbon sequestration actually is of these remaining carbon sinks. We do that assessment using satellite data, satellite technology. We work together with the Swiss Technical University of Zurich. That data is captured. We maintain data integrity by storing each unit of 1 metric ton of carbon on a blockchain to make it a fungible data set, which can be passed on to a person or a unit or a company, whatever, that has a carbon footprint. And for the first time, they can take a specific carbon footprint and carbon balance it with science-verified carbon sequestration. And the combined data set is stored on a blockchain as evidence and proof. And all that data is accessible through a QR code. And so we're introducing the concept of carbon balancing. Now, this opens up very interesting possibilities. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a former foreign minister of Nigeria. And I was explaining to him that the project, and then I'll end the monologue here and ask for questions and for us to have a multi-log, okay? Since there are more than 2 of us here. The Great Wall of Africa is a project that has been there for decades to build a natural barrier from Senegal all the way to Djibouti, across the Sahel, to stop the increased encroachment of the Sahara Desert, to safeguard the biomes that make up the savannas and the Sahel, and to retain the sources of water for which you need plants. In other words, when you have trees, you have a forest, the water is retained. You reduce what we call the aquatranspiration of the soil, the evaporation of water. And so once you have vegetation, the water can be captured and the aquifers can be refilled. The sources of water, the springs that then surface, can be maintained and life can be supported. So that's the basic idea. But the problem is that for the Great Wall of Africa to be established is regarded as a cost center for most governments. It needs money. We have limited budgets. So by the time you go through your budget, education, healthcare, provision of energy, infrastructure development, you name it, there's no money left to plant trees, to maintain trees. It's a cost center. It never gets done. The desert expands. Habitat is lost. Resources diminished. Conflict arises between the farmers and the cattle herders. You have internal conflict. People become desperate. They become extreme. Then you have the introduction of extremist ideology, be it through ISIS or whatever. And you have the entire zone is now destabilized at huge human costs. It's a catastrophe. And the Great Wall of Africa would have mitigated this to a large extent. So it's of vital importance. And so we've introduced something called the OXÜ-ZEN Program. Stands for the OXÜ-ZEN Youth Education Solution. It's a program, it's very simple, where we start with 5-year-old kids. First week in school, every child plants 3 trees. Those trees are registered in the name of the child, become part of an afforestation program. As the trees grow, they absorb carbon, can be measured, can be assessed, quantified, and can be monetized. So what this means is that the first tree can finance the primary school education of the child. First and second tree combined finances the secondary school education. First, second, and the third tree combined finances the tertiary or vocational training of the child. So with a simple program, by connecting the dots, you have literally an amazing, impact. And to close that circle, 20 years later, 2 of these kids get together to form a family. They have 2 kids. What do? Mother and father transfer their trees over to their children. What if they have more than 2 kids? What does the third and the fourth child have to do? They have to plant 3 trees. And the circle is closed. I will end at this point and hand over to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christopher, for such an inspiring presentation. So there's the floor open for Q&A. So if you have some comments you would like to make about Christopher's presentation or a question directed to him, please raise your hand or just unmute yourself and talk. Yes, Nolita, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I always prepare a question just in case people need a second to think about the question they're going to ask. I laughed a little bit when you made the monkey example about the 2 monkeys that are taking all the resources and the other monkeys in the cage, etc. There's an element of like, oh, why don't the other monkeys do something about the ones that are taking all the resources? And there's a very important element of like, well, at least in the Homo sapien context, the ones that are taking the resources have guns or other things that are making them, better able to use resources, etc., etc. So when it comes to the question of empowering, to speak to the violence question, but more than just the violence question, as you said, it's also about like who is caring about fortune, etc., etc. Are there practical examples you have seen of how to do this work of empowering communities that are facing this type of destabilization, this type of violence, etc.?
Yes. When we look at one of the major issues we have today is the emergence of mega cities, predominantly in the global south. which is driven by what? People are leaving the rural areas to go to the urban centers. They leave the rural areas. Why? Because they cannot establish a good quality of life. There's no healthcare. They're disconnected from the financial system. And so they migrate, they leave the old folks behind and they migrate into the cities. The migration is at an extent higher than infrastructure development can actually keep up. So there's reduced availability of water, sanitation, provision of energy, etc. And you have informal settlements that are growing, which now become the root cause of social issues. So sometimes you listen to forums and they're talking about, oh, we need to design new concepts of megacities. And I'm saying, no, that's the wrong thing to be looking at. How smart can a smart city be if you have no waste management system for the majority of the people? That's not a very smart city in my estimation. So how do you prevent rural land flight? Because at the end of the day, for example, when you look at the statistics in Africa, there's some projections that say 80% of Africans will be living in megacities. It's unsustainable. It's the rural population that feeds the urban population. If you have 80% of people living in the urban centers, who's going to feed them? So you're now looking at food insecurity. Food has to be imported from where? From Ukraine? Thank you very much. Right? So trade, balance of trade, the whole thing is not sustainable. So you have to, and if you ask the individuals who have left the rural areas to live in a slum, would you come to live in the urban center if you had a decent life in the rural areas? They all say no. I would stay in the rural areas. So how can we do that? So the people that are leaving literally are leaving a carbon sink. If we have a way of monetizing the carbon sequestration, and that monetization goes to the people, and they are now able to use the revenue in the way they want to use the revenue that meets their needs, then they can now have a direct impact and empowerment of their lives. So in some of the examples that we have communities that literally had nothing, are now able to monetize carbon sequestration through OXÜ-ZEN, and the 100% of the price goes to the community, to the owners, the custodians of the land. We ask them, guys, how do you want to spend the money when it comes? Think of it now, not when the money comes, you then start arguing how to think of it now, come up with a program. And guess what happens? The community gets together and they have a conversation as to what do we need? Is it pipe-borne water? Is it rural electrification? Is it schools? If we build a school, we need to have a teacher. We need to pay the teacher a salary. How do we get a teacher? The teachers are in the urban centers. So you now have to get a teacher from the urban center, from the city, to come and live in the village and teach their children. It's a transaction. What is the salary? Where do we put him? How do we attract him to come? So you find out there are teachers in the city that they're not employed. All of a sudden, you're changing the equation. Okay, so the program that is developed, which then of course, by default includes, we need to protect the source of income. The source of income is dependent on the level of carbon sequestration. Can we increase that? Yes. How? By restoring the land, protecting what we have, planting trees, etc. And all of a sudden, you start having a positive impact. And the people are empowered to use what they need based on, there's no NGO parachuting in, telling them what they need and should do and what have you. It's from the bottom up. That is empowerment. When people begin to realize that I have an influence on the outcome of my life. Okay? we link it to the SDGs. So based on the program, we link it to the SDGs. So a particular converter may be linked to SDG 6, 7, 8. Another one may be linked to 13, 14, 15. The buyers of carbon sequestration capacity can now not only choose where they want to engage in the purchase of sequestration capacity, but the ones that link to SDGs that form a good fit to the corporate social responsibility statements that they may have, which they can then leverage back into marketing. And so it's very interesting, and it's quite exciting when you start visualizing and you start seeing examples of how communities are being transformed. Matthias.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. I would like to ask, how does this system actually empowers the people you're working with? How does this help? Isn't there some kind of danger that it could be kind of translated into, as carbon bonds are usually, into some sort of greenwashing?
Okay, there are two things here in your question. One is how can it, so let's separate. One is how does it affect the community, and how do we ensure it is not greenwashing? Okay, so I'll separate those two. Now, how does it affect the community? I'll give an example. East Africa, you've all heard of the Masai Mara. I would think most of you have heard of the Masai Mara. A game park, but a lot of tourists go there, etc. Now, it's interesting that the Masai Mara is actually a conservancy. It is a grouping of individual Maasai clans, families that have gotten together to form a conservancy, and they have agreed that they will remove all physical barriers, allow the movement of biodiversity, and they will lease out pockets of land to hospitality service providers, and they will now run little hotels and lodges and safari camps, etc. And who do they employ? They employ the local Maasai. Okay, so that's the economic model that is employed amongst the conservancies that are using their area as a national game park recognized by the government. Okay. So the economic model worked as long as the tourists came. The only problem, we had COVID. Now, what happened? The whole system collapsed. So what now happens? People don't have a job, they have no income. They can't pay their bills, they can't pay their expenses. A child gets sick. The child is crying. I, as a father, what do? I need to take the kid to the hospital. My wife is pregnant, about to give birth. I need to take my wife to the hospital. I have to pay bills. I don't have the money. Somebody walks up to me and says, hey, why don't you shoot that rhino? I'll give you $500. What's my plan B? How long will I resist plan A if I don't have a plan B? So one of the things we need to understand is that if somebody doesn't have a plan B, you will execute plan A, no matter how stupid it is, if you don't have a plan B. And so the whole system was now collapsing. So we were losing biodiversity. There was encroachment, there was this, there was that. The parks couldn't be managed. It was a catastrophe. It was a biodiversity bomb that was basically blowing up in our faces. Okay, so now with the Masai Mara Conservancy joining this program, they're now able to monetize the actual science-verified carbon sequestration that is occurring in the park. So we measure that. This is scientific. We know how much metric tons of carbon was actually absorbed. That capacity now can be monetized. So this leads to the second question, or the second part of your question about greenwashing. Now we can go to a company, and that company says, we have a carbon footprint of X amount. And what we do is we buy certificates, carbon credits. Now we know, because The Guardian just published an article a couple months ago that basically said 90% of the carbon credits is not worth the paper that you print it out on. That's why most carbon credits are just sent as a PDF file. I mean, that's my ironic addition here, okay? Because it's not worth the paper that is printed, so you keep it as a PDF, right? And you pass it on, you use it, and you sell it to somebody else. So you pass it on to somebody else, again, as a PDF. So it's all crap. So when I speak to certain emitters, I ask them, why don't you consider, instead of buying a carbon credit, a certificate that is based on nothing, why don't you buy actual science-verified carbon sequestration? And if you are buying $100 worth of carbon sequestration capacity, the $100, unlike the carbon certificate that you've been buying, that $100 goes to the owners of the land. And you want to know what they're doing with it? Here's a report. This is what they want to do with it. And it's linked to these SDGs. So the $100 goes to the people. And then we, as the platform enabling that transaction, we take 5%, which we add on top. So when you purchase the $100, you check out, your checkout amount is 105. Now you know everything. $100 goes to the converters on the ground. $5 comes to the platform. That ratio in itself is a world record. And we are the only ones where you know exactly what happens and where the money goes to, at least to my knowledge. So the question that I ask these emitters is, I asked them, I said, given the choice, would you rather pay for a certificate of a yogurt or a real yogurt? And some mischievously then ask me, yeah, but what's the price difference? At which point I say, you're an idiot. I mean, if you ask, if the choice is between a certificate of a yogurt and a real yogurt, well, then I say, okay, fine, the price is the same. So which one would you purchase? I'll purchase the yogurt. I say, well, you're not as dumb as you look. That's a wise decision. So that's effectively what we're doing. You can either buy a certificate of whatever that means, or you can buy the real science-verified carbon sequestration capacity. So that's the answer to your second question, or to the second part of your question.
Thanks, Christopher. We have a question from Lourdes in the chat. She's asking you, what do you think is the role of the southern states and governments in this process?
It's a deep question. The role of the southern states, the global south, is to recognize that they should all read the IPCC report. According to the IPCC report, 69% of global carbon sequestrations happens in the tropical regions of the planet. So let's say 70%, 70%. 30% happens in the temperate zones. Temperate zones meaning 10% in the southern hemisphere, 20% in the northern hemisphere, based on the distribution of landmass. Okay? 70% of the carbon sequestration is happening in the tropical region, the tropical band of the planet. Now, according to the data that is publicly available, and depending on where you get that data from and what you include in it, the annual carbon market is estimated between $300 to $900 billion a year. Let me say it still again, between $300 to $900 billion a year is the carbon market, including CO2 carbon taxation, and that is, money is changing hands primarily in the Northern Hemisphere, okay, to effectively do transactions to claim some form of carbon neutrality. Okay. Now, logic would indicate that 70% of that amount should probably go to where the sequestration actually happens, which is in the tropical regions. Fact is, none of it goes to the tropical regions. Not even 1%. It's less than 10% or 1%. It's basically nothing. So there's a study that I did for the Club of Rome, which looked at the following question. Of the G20 countries, what was the emission of the G20 countries? The G20 countries, according to the IPCC report, between 1998 and 2018, emitted over 39 gigatons of CO2 in that 20-year gap, okay? So when we do the calculation, okay, of that, how much was absorbed by the tropical regions? And now if we take that amount and we apply an economic value, we took the European EU ETS price, the emission trading scheme price, which at that time was about 90 euros a ton. So let's take 50% of that, so a 50% discount. How much is the economic contribution of the tropical regions of the planet with regards to the absorption of CO2, right? How much is that? The answer, 12 trillion euros. So I want you to all listen very carefully. So the tropical regions of the planet have contributed between 1998 and 2018 an economic value to the equivalent of 12 trillion euros. That is 12,000 billion. Okay? The interesting thing is that that economic contribution to the common good, what I call the global planetary common good, is not reflected in any GDP, is not reflected as an economic contribution that has been provided, of which the beneficiaries are who? Are those who emitted it. Right? And so at that point, I am calling on the global South. I'm calling on the leaders of the nations, the tropical regions, to come together and say, hey guys, this is our economic contribution. How are we going to handle this? How do we leverage this? How do we bring this into how do we get this reflected into the overall economic analysis? Because if it truly is included, it raises the question as to who is rich and who is poor. Okay? Now, if I'm a representative of the global South, and I get the other side to accept that, yes, that is a contribution that you have done, of which I, in the global North, are a beneficiary of. And then I say to you, yeah, okay, so how much of the 12 trillion do you think you can pay us back? And by the way, the interesting thing, just to wrap that number up, is if we look at that 12 trillion as a debt, and we apply the same interest rates that is used in the IMF and the World Bank, and we apply that interest rate for over the 20 years, you can multiply that number by 5, it ends up 60 trillion. There's no way the global North can pay that. So what does that mean? It means we can say, well, at least, you're acknowledging that you owe that money or a part of that. And if you agree that you owe part of that money and you tell us that you can't pay for it, okay, let's do a deal. The deal we can do is recognize that as part of the supposed debt we owe you. Release us of the burden of debt. Release us of the crazy interest rates that we're paying. In Nigeria right now, literally 90% of the available cash that the government has is actually supposed to be used for the servicing of debt. Imagine that we would arrive at a situation where we say, okay, guys, you can't pay us 60 trillion. All right, we'll give you a loan for that. And you offset it by whatever it is that we need to do. You understand what I'm saying? So that is one way, Lourdes, that we need to create a consciousness, and we have to be united when we get onto the global stage. When we go to COP28, it shouldn't be a whole bunch of South American nations, Brazil saying this, Argentina saying something else, Venezuela saying something else, and Sherry in Mexico, by the way, greetings to you, is saying something else. There has to be a united voice. The South American position has to be in line with the African position. When the African position and the South American position and the Asian position is in line, and we end up at a global stage, that's when you begin to be relevant. You're sitting at the table and they have to listen to you because you are representing 40, 50% of humanity. You can no longer be ignored. That's what we need. So you said, who sets the international carbon price? That's a good one. The international carbon price is effectively set by supply demand. Now, the essence is we have to arrive at the need to carbon balance. Once we arrive at the need to carbon balance, we have to now look at what is actually the supply demand. So when you ask the question of all the anthropogenic carbon emissions, that is due to human activity, and you ask the question, how much of that is actually absorbed by all the terrestrial carbon sinks on the planet, all the forests, savannas, mangroves, wetlands, etc. How much do they absorb? It's actually 30% only. 30–40% goes into the oceans, and the rest cannot be absorbed by the planet. It's accumulating in the atmosphere, right? That's why we have this increase of CO2 concentration that started initially at 270, now we're at 420, rising. It's an accumulative increase. So 30%, all the forests absorb 30% only, okay? Now, if we are successful to reach the millennial goals of a 50% reduction, so from 100 you go down to 50 by 2050, all else being equal, we still only have 30% that is absorbing the 50, there's still a gap. So what this means is that the supply demand is always in the favor of those who have the carbon sinks for the foreseeable future. So what this means is that as the consciousness increases that we need to carbon balance, the demand increases to get the sequestration capacity. So the price of carbon can only go up over time based on that economic principle. And so what this means is that carbon sequestration capacity should become a more and more critical resource that can be then monetized, and hopefully the monetization will be used in a positive way to increase the true quality of life of our people.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Christopher, go ahead.
Yeah, of the 50%, there was another question that just came up. Does the model then not have the same pitfalls as the circular economy models, i.e., not fundamentally addressing the issues of excess material consumption? The model doesn't have the same pitfall. However, the idea of a circular economy cannot work unless the issue of excess consumption is addressed. Okay, so I hope I'm answering that question. So let me give another example here very quickly. There are economic models or also philosophical models that now talk of life systems. So an economic model can be replicated or explained using the example of a life system. So let's look at a life system, a human body. The human body is considered to be healthy when what happens? When all the subsystems are in balance. When all the subsystems are in balance, we feel comfortable, no pain, and we probably have a body temperature just below 37 degrees. As soon as one of the subsystems goes out of sync and starts to multiply out of control, and in the process of multiplying, destroys the cells and the organs around it, that body obviously is not healthy. It has a problem, has a sickness. And if it now happens to be an uncontrolled multiplication of some subset, it's cancer. It's called cancer. Now imagine a disease where you have one organ. One of the interesting things, by the way, of the human body or any form of life is blood flow. Blood flow. Okay? You have a heart, it pumps. That blood is distributed in a most amazing way, right to the finest capillaries. Every cell in our body gets access to the oxygen. It in a wondrous way. It's really crazy when you think about it. With every heartbeat, boom, 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 every cell gets something. And if every cell gets something, we're healthy. But if one part of the body doesn't get something due to not enough circulation, it dies off. Sickness, no longer in balance. Now we have a body, this is where it becomes kind of crazy. You have a body where some sub-organs decide to not only take 50, 60, 70% of all their blood for themselves, but not only that, they hold on to the blood. They don't release it back to the heart. I use blood flow as a symbol for the flow of capital. Capital is good as long as it is flowing. If I make $100 and I keep it for myself, all of you get nothing. But if I take $100 and I give Matthias $2, Nolita $2, Lourdes $2, and by giving you $2, you give me something in return, whatever it is. Then all of a sudden, there's an economy going on. Capital is flowing, services and goods are flowing, everything works. But when you have a subset of humans that now decide to monopolize the capital, the flow of their blood, and prevent it from flowing to other parts of the body, to other parts of humanity, how can you then claim that humanity is healthy? So that's one of the issues that we have. Capital has to flow, has to move. There's no need to hoard it. Bottom line. So talking about material consumption, just to get there, the material consumption is also in line with the flow of the blood. If my material consumption is at the expense of somebody being deprived, again, using the same example of the spaceship, we're all astronauts, and you have a subset of astronauts who decide to use up 90% of the supply on the spaceship. Houston, we have a problem. Doesn't work. So yes, the material consumption has to be balanced for the circular economy to work. If that is not balanced, you don't have a circle. I don't know what you have. You probably have the shape of a turd, not a circle.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Sadly, we're at the end of our time range, but just wanted to thank you on behalf of the 50% for sharing your time and the wisdom that you have sought during your life. It has been truly an inspiring session, and I'm pretty sure everyone has a lot on their minds to get from this conversation. Thank you, and thank you to everyone that has attended this session. Please stay tuned, because we're going to have some exciting news on the Intergens pretty soon. And Christopher, maybe I'll leave you for a final message.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for accepting me. Nice to see some of the faces that I saw in Costa Rica. So big shout out to all of you. I hope that we can meet again, in person soon and exchange. But I just want you guys to know that I'm very pleased to see you guys again, and also to reinforce the fact that we're all in it together. We're all brothers and sisters on the same spaceship, and we should all have a safe flight. That's how I'm going to end it, with a happy landing. Okay?
Thank you, Christopher, and thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. All the best, guys.